So Doug Ford extends the emergency orders for at least 3 more months. The Legislative Assembly of Ontario has voted once again to extend Dougie's special powers. And basically, he's keeping all of his emergency orders in place until March 2022. He can amend and extend it until March 28th, 2022. Now, I don't like Doug Ford. I mean, the guy looks like he looks like the person you just invite over to watch a hockey game and have a couple beers with. He's kind of like a big Chris Farley, right? So he looks likable in that way. But as a politician, I just don't trust the guy. Do you trust the guy? So far, his track record, I think he sucks. I mean, let's keep in mind that in October, Dougie stated that he planned to lift all COVID restrictions by March of next year. So he planned to lift them by March, and now he's already extending to March 28th. But I want to read something from CTV, October 22nd, something that was being said by him. The long-term plan to manage the spread of COVID-19 will continue into January, when the province will begin to lift vaccine certificate requirements in settings the government deems as lower risk. Beginning on January 17th, 2022, and barring concerning trends of virus transmission, restaurants, sporting facilities, and casinos will be able to host patrons without checking their vaccination status. Those measures will continue to ease in other settings in the months that follow. Also, starting on March 28th and onwards, the government says that all remaining public health and workplace safety measures in businesses and organizations will lift, including the requirement to wear a mask indoors. That's awesome. I hope so. I certainly hope so. But do I think so? No, I don't think so. Do you really think after 2 years that they're just going to lift everything? I really hope so. Yeah, I hope so. But again, I don't think so. So can we first acknowledge that we're talking about emergency orders, and there is not a state of emergency? Roman Baber, MPP, put it nicely when he said, "Emergency orders without a declaration of a state of emergency is an assault on democracy." Yeah, it is an assault on democracy. It's also an assault on logic. Logically, would you follow orders for an emergency if there was not an emergency? If we do not declare an emergency, can we expect people to follow orders that they would have to follow during an emergency? If I yell at you, stop, drop, and roll when you're not on fire, are you going to do it? Some Canadians will. Man. Anyway, so what is an emergency? Anytime we're going to have a conversation about anything, like any critical conversations, any philosophical conversations, intellectual conversations, to make sure that we're on the same page, the best thing that we can do is define our terms to make sure that when someone says something, everyone knows exactly what that person means. There's no confusion. So, emergency. Let's go to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary definition. An unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. Or an urgent need for assistance or relief. The essential meaning: an unexpected and usually dangerous situation that calls for immediate action. Unexpected, dangerous, needs immediate action. So how do we assess danger in this situation? How do we assess danger in Ontario right now, or for other people outside of Ontario around the world? How do we assess danger? Throughout this pandemic, we've been looking at 3 different things: cases, hospitalizations, and deaths primarily. And the major focus has been on the least important, or what in my opinion is the least important. I'm not a doctor or epidemiologist or a specialist of any sort, so my opinion should not be held super high on this. I'm just trying to help people think a little bit on this, how I think anyways. Anyway, so cases. So everyone's looking at cases. Instead of case impacts, we're focusing on cases. And how do we determine cases, right? The main thing we've been doing for this whole time is these PCR tests. Don't want to go too much detail on that. There's other videos out there to explain how unreliable they are. The CDC and the FDA have admitted that they are unreliable now, especially with high cycle thresholds. Okay, Kary Mullis, the Nobel Prize winning inventor, he got the Nobel Prize for inventing the PCR test. He said it should never be used as a diagnostic device, but that's what we're doing. And we're doing it at extremely high cycle thresholds. It's extremely unreliable. Lots of false conclusions being brought out with this. And then we look at symptoms. Symptoms. Everything's a symptom, it feels like. Sniffles are a symptom. Cough's a symptom. Fever's a symptom. Everything we think of is a symptom. I have a son in daycare. If he has a cough, then they want me to get him tested. A cough. How often do kids get coughs? Sniffles. My kid gets a sniffle when we play outside and we come inside. He'll have a sniffle for a little bit. Happens to me too, right? But then they'll say, oh, that could be COVID. We need to get him tested. And that happens all around the world. And people want you to get tested. Just think of that. The virus is so deadly, okay, especially amongst children, that you need to get tested just to know if you have it. That's wild. That's wild. This is a deadly pandemic, right? Anyway, then we have asymptomatic. Asymptomatic. Before 2020, what did you call a healthy person? Was a healthy person always referred to as asymptomatic? You're not asymptomatic until you have it and you're showing no symptoms. Otherwise, you're just healthy. But we call everyone who's healthy asymptomatic, which creates a paradigm that we're throwing out there that every single person who is not showing symptoms must have it and might be spreading it. That's the little subconscious thing that's going on in everyone's background. Oh, this person's asymptomatic, but they still need to be careful that they don't spread it to me 6 feet. 6 feet, folks. 6 feet. Hospitalizations. So cases, yeah, then we should focus on case impacts, hospitalizations and deaths. Hospitalizations are really interesting because, especially in Canada, hospitals tend to operate close to capacity or even over capacity. So I owned a gym and I had plenty of doctors and nurses, plenty of first responders, and they always talked about how they're short-staffed. I'd have a doctor come in, she'd finish a huge shift, and say, oh, I'm just exhausted. We were so short-staffed. Except she was saying that for years, like years before the pandemic. So they're always short-staffed. My mom's a nurse in a long-term care facility. They're always short-staffed. She's always complaining about how they're short-staffed. So they're always operating, over capacity. Even in massive flu years like 2017, they were having a shortage of beds, this, that, and the other. They were saying the exact same things. And even now, we're looking at the ratio. Like, the problem isn't the beds right now. It's the ratios, at least in Ontario anyway. It's the ratios of nurses and doctors to beds. And yet they're firing people. So can we say this is unexpected if they are firing people and they've had 2 years now to try and prepare and get more facilities, more equipment and everything available? And then they're firing people. That doesn't really make sense to me. Does it make sense to you? Comment below. Explain it to me, please, because I'm sure I am missing something, and that's all we need to do is have conversations about this and bring clarity to the situation. So let's talk about deaths, because deaths is a very interesting one. I mean, by now, I think everyone is suspect of what's been going on with deaths, because we see people getting in car accidents, committing suicide, getting shot, drowning. These people are being counted as COVID deaths, people with, late stage cancer, people in hospices, dying, and then it's counting as COVID deaths. And our officials are admitting this, right? For a while there, it was 60 days after a positive test. So you could be asymptomatic. Okay, you could show no symptoms, have a positive test, and then die 59 days later, and it would get counted as a COVID death, right? And then they're like, oh, okay, let's bring it down to 28 or 30 days or whatever. But still, even 28 or 30 days is pretty ridiculous. So that's how we've been operating with deaths. And not to mention, that's still the PCR test, which we've already discussed is unreliable. You can look that up. Fact checkers, please correct me on that. So I personally know a nurse, okay, in Toronto. Someone attempted committing suicide. Okay, they're in a coma. They test the person while the person is in a coma. The person dies the next day, and it's a COVID death. So that's firsthand for me. Fact checkers, please remove it from the record. It's just a coincidental story. I don't know. But these things are happening. Okay, these things are happening. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this situation? Is it highly dangerous at this point? Why aren't we having conversations about that? And that's what I really want to get at. Cases, hospitalizations, deaths. We have these three things. There's all types of weird variables around them that need to be addressed, but the conversation isn't happening. Maybe everything I just said is wrong. Maybe it's incorrect. Maybe there are things to elaborate on that to make it make sense. I don't know. I would like people to have the conversations about this. And why aren't people like Doug Ford forcing these conversations to happen? Instead, what he's doing is he's saying, hey, you know what, guys? Like, I know these people are making all these models which have always been incorrect. They've always been way off. But if I don't listen to them, that's political suicide. I might as well go out and hang myself. So he just does whatever they say. These are unelected officials telling us how to run our province, saying, do these measures, do those measures. And the premier isn't even pushing back. And MPPs that want to push back get thrown out of caucus. Think about that. These are people who are supposed to be speaking for their constituents, but instead they're just listening to the dictates of unelected officials. Okay? That is wrong. Why hasn't anyone, I said this question in episode 2, why hasn't anyone just come forward and said, hey, how do we minimize the health risks while protecting our rights and freedoms, not crashing the economy, not increasing the money supply by 20%, leading to crazy inflation, right? How do we minimize the health risks without jeopardizing everything else? No one's asked that question. That's pretty crazy to me. And then you have to ask yourself, man, Doug Ford really must be like Chris Farley or whatever. He must be stupid. Do you think he's that stupid? Do you think he's that incompetent? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think he's that stupid. I don't think he's that incompetent. The man has made millions and millions of dollars over the last 2 years. He's benefited very handsomely. His net worth has gone up a lot over this pandemic. So he's doing very well in that regard. You have to ask yourself as well, because you always wonder with a lot of politicians is whether or not they're compromised, whether they're being blackmailed. I don't know. All I know is that his daughter is saying a lot of stuff that goes against the things that he's saying. So maybe he's speaking to us through his daughter. Maybe he's being threatened, blackmailed. I'm not really sure. There's also the notion that, well, elections are going to be coming up it's not too far away. It's coming up soon. So maybe he said all these things about opening up and lifting restrictions. He said all those things just so that, in the future he can say, hey guys, I know these variants came out and we had to double up on all these measures and we had to lock everyone down and continue to take away their rights. But before the variants came out, I did say that I wanted to lift all the restrictions. I even said I want masks off completely. So maybe he's just trying to prep himself for an election and he just knew that, it's going to be a dark winter. And that is what I want to get at, guys. I'm not holding my breath on this. I don't think any of you should hold your breath on what Doug Ford said. Okay? Don't get optimistic about this. Hope for the best, expect the worst. And to me, it's going to be a dark winter and our rights aren't just going to be given back to us. Okay? Governments always expand. They don't get smaller on their own. We got to speak up. We got to stand up. It's going to be a dark winter.